Jasmine Thompson's designer dress dripped with orange juice, the flight attendant's smirk still burning in her mind. Just an accident, they claimed. As her husband Anthony's private jet took off without the original crew, Jasmine realized this wasn't the first time racism had nearly destroyed her life. Before we dive into this shocking story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about people standing up against discrimination. Ready to see how a single accident led to an entire airline crew losing their jobs? Let's get into it. Jasmine Thompson checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The medical conference in Atlanta would begin tomorrow morning, and she needed to be well rested for her keynote speech. At 36, she was one of the youngest, and one of the few black female neurosurgeons invited to present at the annual Neurological Innovation Summit. Despite her impressive credentials, a familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach as she waited to board her Amerisky Airlines flight. First-class passengers may now begin boarding, announced the gate agent with practiced cheerfulness. Jasmine gathered her carry-on and approached the priority lane. The agent's smile faltered slightly as she approached, her eyes flickering with surprise, or was it suspicion? "First class is boarding now, ma'am," the agent repeated, emphasizing the words as if Jasmine had misunderstood. "Yes, I know. Here's my boarding pass," Jasmine replied, sliding her ticket across the counter. She had experienced this countless times before, the assumption that she couldn't possibly belong in first class. The agent scanned her pass with a tight smile. "Oh. Yes. Have a nice flight, Dr. Thompson." Jasmine nodded and moved toward the jet bridge, her shoulders squared with practiced dignity. She had worked too hard to let these daily paper cuts affect her confidence. After graduating top of her class at Johns Hopkins and completing her residency at Mayo Clinic, she had pioneered a revolutionary technique for treating previously inoperable brain tumors. Yet somehow, her accomplishments never seemed to override first impressions based solely on her skin color. As she settled into her spacious first-class seat, Jasmine thought about her husband Anthony. At 42, he had built TechFusion into a billion-dollar empire from nothing but raw talent and determination. Growing up in one of Harlem's toughest neighborhoods, he had taught himself coding by sneaking into the public library after school. His AI ethics platform had revolutionized the tech industry, making him not just wealthy but influential in shaping how artificial intelligence was developed responsibly. Anthony was supposed to travel with her today, but a last-minute board meeting had delayed him. "I'll take the private jet and meet you at the hotel tonight," he had promised that morning, kissing her goodbye. She smiled at the memory. Despite his success, Anthony remained grounded, using his resources not for flashy displays but to create opportunities for underrepresented communities in tech and medicine. Jasmine's thoughts were interrupted by a flight attendant approaching the white businessman across the aisle. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I get you a pre-flight beverage? Perhaps champagne or sparkling water?" The attendant, Stephanie Watson according to her name tag, smiled brightly. The man requested scotch, which Stephanie promised to bring right away. When she turned to Jasmine, however, her demeanor shifted subtly. The smile remained, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Anything to drink?" she asked, the warmth gone from her voice. "Water, please," Jasmine replied. Stephanie nodded curtly and moved on without another word. Jasmine sighed quietly. This too was familiar. The different treatment, the subtle messages that she didn't belong in this premium cabin. As other passengers boarded, Jasmine noticed several glances in her direction. A middle-aged white couple took the seats in front of her, doing a double-take as they passed. The woman whispered something to her husband, who looked back at Jasmine with undisguised curiosity. When Stephanie returned with drinks, she placed the businessman's scotch on his tray with a napkin and another smile. She practically dropped Jasmine's water bottle onto her tray without a napkin, not even making eye contact before hurrying away to serve other passengers. As the cabin filled, Jasmine observed Stephanie's interactions with other passengers. With white travelers, she was attentive and friendly. With the few other black passengers, all seated in economy, her manner was noticeably cooler. The temperature in the cabin dropped as the air conditioning ramped up. Jasmine shivered slightly and pressed the call button to request a blanket. Minutes passed, but no one came. She pressed it again. Still nothing. After the third attempt, another flight attendant, Brian Mitchell according to his name tag, appeared. "Yes?" he asked, his tone suggesting she was inconveniencing him. "I've been trying to get a blanket," Jasmine explained politely. "We're preparing for departure. I'll see if we have any left after takeoff," he replied, immediately canceling her call button and walking away. Jasmine noticed the white woman across from her receiving a blanket from Stephanie without even having to ask. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that these situations weren't worth her energy. She had a keynote to deliver tomorrow, and that was what mattered. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Jasmine tried to focus on reviewing her presentation notes. Her research on racial disparities in neurological treatment outcomes was groundbreaking, and this conference would put her findings in front of the field's top minds. She couldn't let these minor indignities distract her from her purpose. Still, as the plane climbed into the sky, Jasmine couldn't help but feel the familiar weight of having to work twice as hard to receive half the respect automatically granted to her white colleagues. She thought about texting Anthony but decided against it. He carried enough burdens without her adding to them with complaints about rude flight attendants. Instead, she opened her laptop and immersed herself in her work, determined to deliver a presentation that would make these petty slights fade into insignificance. 2 hours into the flight, Jasmine carefully spread her presentation notes across her tray table. Her keynote speech needed one final review before tomorrow's conference. She had chosen to wear her burgundy Zac Posen dress. A splurge she'd allowed herself after completing her fellowship, for the opening reception tonight. The structured silk garment hung carefully in the closet of her first-class cabin, protected by a garment bag. As drink service began again, Jasmine watched Stephanie chatting amicably with passengers in the first few rows. The flight attendant laughed at a joke from an older white gentleman, touching his shoulder lightly as she poured his coffee with precision. When Stephanie finally reached Jasmine's row, her expression shifted to one of professional detachment. "Something to drink?" she asked, her voice flat. "Orange juice, please," Jasmine replied with a polite smile, determined to maintain her composure despite the obvious disparity in treatment. Stephanie nodded and poured orange juice from a carton into a plastic cup. As she extended her arm to place it on Jasmine's tray table, her hands suddenly tilted. The bright orange liquid cascaded directly onto Jasmine's lap, splashing across her cream-colored pants and soaking her meticulously prepared presentation notes. Jasmine gasped, jumping to her feet as the cold juice seeped through the fabric. "Oh my God!" "Oops," Stephanie said, her expression momentarily revealing something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction before morphing into a mask of professional concern. "So sorry about that." Turbulence. Jasmine hadn't felt any turbulence. The seatbelt sign wasn't on. The drink in the businessman's hand across the aisle hadn't even rippled. "Could I get some napkins, please?" Jasmine asked, struggling to keep her voice steady as orange juice dripped onto her expensive shoes. "Sure," Stephanie replied, tossing a small cocktail napkin onto Jasmine's tray before immediately turning away. "I'll be back with more." The businessman across the aisle frowned, watching the interaction. That was hardly enough. He began, but Stephanie had already moved down the aisle. Jasmine used the single napkin to blot her soaked presentation notes, but it was useless against the amount of juice that had been spilled. Her heart sank as she saw the ink beginning to run, smearing months of careful preparation. "Here," said a soft voice from behind her. A white woman with kind eyes leaned forward, offering a pack of tissues. "I'm Diane." "That didn't look like an accident to me." Jasmine accepted the tissues gratefully. "Thank you." "I'm Jasmine. I've been watching how they're treating you," Diane continued quietly. "It's not right." Jasmine nodded, surprised by the woman's perceptiveness and solidarity. I should clean up in the restroom. Gathering her stained notes and purse, Jasmine made her way to the first-class lavatory. Inside the tiny space, she did her best to blot the juice from her pants, fighting back tears of frustration. The presentation notes were beyond salvation. She would need to rely on her memory and the backup files on her laptop. As she dabbed at her pants, she heard voices just outside the door, Stephanie and Brian speaking in hushed tones. "Did you see her face?" Stephanie was saying, a laugh in her voice. "Priceless." "You're bad," Brian replied, chuckling. "But seriously, what's she doing in first class anyway? Probably used her husband's miles." "Or worse," Stephanie added. "These people always think they deserve special treatment." These people. The word stung Jasmine like a physical blow. She had heard this coded language throughout her life, in medical school, during her residency, even from patients who requested another doctor when they saw her. Almost without thinking, Jasmine pulled out her phone and began recording. "Did you see how she kept pressing the call button?" Stephanie continued. "Like she's the Queen of Sheba or something." "Well, her kind always want extra attention," Brian replied. "Remember that family in economy last month? Complained about everything. I know exactly how to handle them," Stephanie said smugly. "Oops, so sorry about your juice." She laughed again. "Bet her fancy pants are ruined." Jasmine's hand trembled as she continued recording, their casual racism washing over her in waves. These weren't just rude flight attendants, this was deliberate humiliation based solely on her race. A gentle knock on the door startled her. "Are you okay in there?" It was Diane's voice. Jasmine quickly stopped the recording and opened the door. "Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to clean up." Diane took in Jasmine's stained clothing and damp eyes. "That was completely inappropriate. You should report them." "I will," Jasmine said, her resolve strengthening. "I definitely will." When Jasmine returned to her seat, she found that Stephanie had made no attempt to clean the orange juice that had spilled on her seat. Meanwhile, a few rows ahead, a white passenger had apparently spilled some water, and Brian was meticulously drying the area, apologizing profusely for the inconvenience. Jasmine sat down in her still damp seat, her blood boiling but her exterior calm. Years of facing discrimination had taught her that showing anger would only reinforce stereotypes. As a black woman, she wasn't allowed the luxury of publicly expressing justified outrage without being labeled aggressive or difficult. She pulled out her phone, considering whether to text Anthony about what had happened. Before she could decide, Stephanie passed by again, this time not even acknowledging Jasmine's juice-soaked state. The contrast between this treatment and the excessive attention given to the water spill was so stark that several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Diane caught Jasmine's eye from across the aisle and gave her an encouraging nod. In that small gesture of solidarity, Jasmine found the strength to plan her next move. This wasn't just about orange juice or rude service. This was about dignity and respect, and she wasn't going to let it pass. Jasmine took several deep breaths, centering herself before pressing the call button again. This time, she wasn't requesting anything, she was demanding accountability. When Brian appeared, his expression made it clear that he considered her a nuisance. "Yes?" he asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. "I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant, please," Jasmine stated firmly. Brian's eyebrows rose slightly. "Regarding?" "The incident with the orange juice," Jasmine replied evenly. "And the subsequent lack of assistance." "I'll see if he's available," Brian said with obvious reluctance, walking away without further acknowledgement. Several minutes later, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a senior crew pin approached. "I'm Michael Reynolds, the lead flight attendant. How can I help you?" Jasmine explained what had happened, the deliberate spill, the inadequate response, and the racist comments she'd overheard. Michael's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. I'm sorry you feel that way, ma'am, but I find it hard to believe Stephanie would intentionally spill a drink on a passenger. Accidents happen during flight service. This wasn't an accident, Jasmine insisted. And I heard them talking afterward, making racist comments. I'm sure you misunderstood, Michael replied dismissively. Our crew is thoroughly trained in customer service. Perhaps you're being a bit sensitive. The implication was clear, he was suggesting she was overreacting, playing the race card. It was a familiar tactic, one designed to make her doubt herself and back down. I recorded their conversation, Jasmine said, pulling out her phone. Would you like to hear it? Michael's expression flickered briefly with concern before returning to practice neutrality. Recording our crew without consent is against airline policy, ma'am. So is racial discrimination, Jasmine countered, her voice steady despite her rising anger. Their conversation was beginning to attract attention from nearby passengers. Stephanie appeared at Michael's side, her face a mask of injured innocence. What seems to be the problem, she asked, as if she hadn't been the cause of it. This passenger is claiming you intentionally spilled orange juice on her, Michael explained, his tone making it clear how ridiculous he found the accusation. Stephanie's eyes widened in feigned shock. That's absolutely not true. It was turbulence, an accident. I apologized and offered napkins. You tossed me one cocktail napkin for an entire glass of juice, Jasmine corrected her. And then I overheard you laughing about it with your colleague. I did no such thing, Stephanie insisted, her voice rising indignantly. I've been nothing but professional. Honestly, I feel threatened by these accusations. The word threatened hung in the air. A loaded term when directed at a black passenger. Jasmine recognized the strategy, painting herself as the victim while portraying Jasmine as the aggressor. I'm not threatening anyone, Jasmine stated clearly. I'm reporting discriminatory treatment. I think you're blowing this out of proportion, Michael said, his tone patronizing. Stephanie apologized for the accident. What more do you want? I want to file a formal complaint, Jasmine replied. And I want a change of seat since mine is still soaked with juice that no one has offered to clean up. Michael sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. I'll see what I can do about finding you another seat. As for the complaint, you can submit that through customer service after we land. As Michael walked away, Stephanie lingered, her expression cold. Some people just look for problems where there aren't any, she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. An elderly white man in the row ahead turned around. I saw what happened, he stated, though Jasmine was certain he hadn't. It was clearly an accident. Some people are just too quick to play the victim. Several other white passengers nodded in agreement, despite having paid little attention to the actual incident. It was as if Stephanie's version of events was automatically more credible simply because of who was telling it. Jasmine felt a familiar isolation descending, the experience of being gaslit about her own reality, of having her truth dismissed by those who hadn't lived it. Then Diane stood up from her seat. Excuse me, she said firmly. I saw exactly what happened. That juice spill was no accident, and the service this woman has received throughout this flight has been appalling compared to how the rest of us have been treated. The cabin grew quiet as passengers turned to look at this unexpected defender. Ma'am, please return to your seat, Michael said, having reappeared at the sound of commotion. We're handling this situation. No, you're dismissing it, Diane replied. I've been watching the different treatment she's received since boarding. It's blatant discrimination. Michael's professional veneer cracked slightly. This doesn't concern you. Discrimination concerns everyone, Diane shot back. The tension in the cabin escalated as more passengers began to comment, some supporting Jasmine and Diane, others defending the crew. The commotion drew the attention of the flight captain, who emerged from the cockpit. What's going on back here? Asked Captain William Harris, his authoritative presence immediately changing the dynamic. Michael quickly approached him, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing toward Jasmine. The captain's expression grew stern as he listened to this one-sided account. Captain Harris approached Jasmine. "Ma'am, I understand there's been an incident. I need you to calm down and stop disrupting the flight." "I am calm," Jasmine replied, her voice level despite the injustice of being portrayed as disruptive. "And I haven't done anything to disrupt this flight. I simply reported discriminatory treatment by your crew." "She has a recording," Diane interjected, "of the flight attendants making racist comments." Captain Harris's eyes narrowed. "A recording? That's against airline regulations and federal aviation rules." "So is discrimination," Jasmine repeated, holding her ground. She pulled out her phone. "Would you like to hear what your crew members said about me?" The captain hesitated, clearly not expecting this response. "That won't be necessary at this time. What's necessary is that we maintain order on this aircraft. If this situation continues to escalate, I'll be forced to divert the plane, which would inconvenience everyone on board." The threat was clear. He was placing the responsibility for any disruption on Jasmine, not on the crew members who had discriminated against her. "I understand," Jasmine said carefully. "I'm simply asking to be treated with the same respect as other passengers." "We'll sort this out after landing," the captain replied dismissively. "For now, Michael will find you another seat." Michael reappeared and directed Jasmine to a seat at the back of the first-class cabin, separated from her carry-on items, which remained stowed above her original seat. "Your belongings will be brought to you after landing," he explained with artificial courtesy. As Jasmine moved to her new seat, isolated from sympathetic witnesses like Diane, she felt the all-too-familiar combination of anger, humiliation, and resignation. This wasn't her first experience with discrimination, and she knew it wouldn't be her last. But something felt different this time. Perhaps because she had evidence, or perhaps because she was no longer the struggling medical student who had to silently endure mistreatment for fear of career repercussions. Once seated, Jasmine pulled out her phone and texted Anthony. "Something happened on the flight that you need to hear," she wrote, attaching the audio recording. "I'm okay, but I'm angry." Anthony's response came quickly, "Listening now. This is completely unacceptable. I'm already on my way. Don't worry, this won't stand." A sense of grim determination replaced Jasmine's resignation. She might have been powerless in the moment, but that didn't mean she would remain so. And her husband, a man who had risen from nothing to create one of the most influential tech companies in America, wasn't someone who took injustice lightly. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Jasmine stared out the window, mentally preparing for what would come next. This incident wasn't over, it was just beginning. The plane touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport with a gentle bump. As other passengers began gathering their belongings, Jasmine remained seated, knowing what was likely coming next. Sure enough, as the seatbelt sign turned off, Michael approached. "Dr. Thompson, please remain seated until all other passengers have deplaned," he instructed with cold professionalism. Jasmine noticed two uniformed security officers waiting in the jet bridge through the open cabin door. So they were going to escalate this further, treating her like a criminal for daring to report discrimination. "Is that really necessary?" asked Diane, who had lingered nearby despite being told to deplane with the others. "Ma'am, please proceed to the terminal," one of the officers called from the doorway. Diane hesitated, giving Jasmine a look of concern. "This isn't right," she said quietly. "It's okay," Jasmine assured her, though it was far from okay. "Thank you for your support." As the last passengers filed out, whispering and casting curious glances back at her, Jasmine felt the weight of dozens of eyes judging her without knowing the full story. The humiliation was precisely calculated, a public spectacle designed to reinforce who held power in this situation. The security officers boarded once the cabin was empty. One was a middle-aged white man with a stern expression, the other was a younger black man who met Jasmine's eyes with subtle understanding. "Ma'am, we were called because of a disturbance on the flight," the white officer stated. "I'm Officer Paul Blackwell, and this is Officer James Foster." There was no disturbance from me, Jasmine replied calmly. I reported discriminatory treatment by the flight crew, and now it appears I'm being punished for it. Stephanie and Brian stood at the front of the cabin, watching with barely concealed satisfaction. Captain Harris emerged from the cockpit to observe the situation. She was disruptive and made the crew feel threatened, Stephanie interjected. We have multiple passenger witnesses. I have evidence of what actually happened, Jasmine countered, pulling out her phone. Including a recording of these flight attendants making racist comments about me after deliberately spilling orange juice on me and my belongings. Officer Foster's expression shifted slightly. Ma'am, may I see some identification, please? Jasmine provided her driver's license and medical credentials. I'm Dr. Jasmine Thompson, neurosurgeon. I'm here for a medical conference where I'm delivering the keynote address tomorrow morning. Officer Foster reviewed her credentials with increasing discomfort, clearly recognizing the disparity between how she was being treated and who she was. And you have a recording of the incident? He asked quietly. Of what happened afterward, Jasmine clarified. Would you like to hear it? Before the officers could respond, a representative from AmeriSky customer service hurried down the jet bridge. I'm Derek Williams, Customer Relations Manager, he announced breathlessly. What seems to be the problem here? The problem, Jasmine stated clearly, is that your flight attendant deliberately poured orange juice on me, provided inadequate assistance afterward, and then made racist comments about me to her colleague, which I recorded. When I reported this treatment, I was isolated, dismissed, and now I'm being treated like a criminal. Derek's practiced smile faltered as he processed this information. That sounds concerning. We take allegations of discrimination very seriously at AmeriSky. Do you? Jasmine asked pointedly. Because your crew's actions suggest otherwise. Derek glanced nervously at the security officers, clearly calculating the potential public relations damage. Let me assure you, this isn't representative of our company values. Perhaps we can discuss this privately. We'd like to offer you a $200 travel voucher for your inconvenience. The insulting inadequacy of this offer, reducing racial discrimination to an inconvenience worth a mere $200, left Jasmine momentarily speechless. Officer Foster cleared his throat. Ma'am, it doesn't appear there's any security issue here. You're free to proceed to the terminal. This seems to be a customer service matter at this point. Thank you, officer, Jasmine replied, gathering her purse. What about my carry-on items? She asked Michael. You said they would be brought to me. I'll retrieve them, Michael replied tersely, clearly unhappy with how the situation was unfolding. As Jasmine waited, Officer Foster leaned closer. For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened to you, he said quietly. It might be worth contacting the airline's corporate office directly rather than dealing with airport staff. Jasmine nodded gratefully at this small kindness. When Michael returned with her belongings, she examined them carefully, relieved to find her laptop undamaged, though her garment bag still showed orange stains where the juice had seeped through. Derek followed her through the terminal, continuing to offer platitudes and the insulting voucher. Jasmine finally stopped and faced him directly. Mr. Williams, I don't want your voucher. What I want is accountability. Your crew discriminated against me because of my race, and then attempted to punish me for reporting it. I'll be filing a formal complaint with your corporate office, the FAA, and the Department of Transportation. Derek's professional smile disappeared entirely. That seems excessive for an accidental drink spill, Dr. Thompson. It wasn't accidental, and we both know it, Jasmine replied, her patience exhausted. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a conference to prepare for. She walked away, leaving Derek standing awkwardly in the middle of the busy terminal. Outside, she hailed a taxi, her hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. The Ritz-Carlton, please, she told the driver, sinking into the back seat. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, the full weight of the experience crashed over her. Her carefully prepared notes were ruined. Her expensive pants were stained. Her confidence was shaken right before the most important presentation of her career. Jasmine checked her phone to find several text messages from colleagues who were already at the conference welcome reception. "Where are you?" texted Dr. Sarah Kim, a fellow neurosurgeon. "The reception started 30 minutes ago." Running late, Jasmine replied simply, unable to summon the energy to explain everything that had happened. She leaned her head against the window, watching the Atlanta skyline pass by. Years of training and practice had taught her to compartmentalize, to push through difficulty and maintain focus on what mattered. But sometimes the constant battle was exhausting. Her phone rang, Anthony calling via video. She answered, trying to compose her features into something resembling normalcy. "Jasmine," Anthony's face appeared on screen, his expression concerned. "I heard the recording. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied automatically, then amended, "Actually, no. I'm not fine." It was humiliating, Anthony. And then they had security waiting when we landed, like I was some kind of threat. Anthony's expression darkened. "I'm already at the hotel. I got here early. Come straight here instead of the Marriott. I booked the presidential suite at the St. Regis. We need to talk about this." "What about the reception?" "I'm supposed to be networking before my keynote tomorrow." "Trust me," Anthony said, a steely determination in his voice that she recognized from his biggest business challenges. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." As the taxi changed direction toward the St. Regis, Jasmine felt a small spark of hope cutting through her exhaustion. Whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. Have you ever faced discrimination and felt powerless to do anything about it? Comment number 1 if you've been in a situation where people assumed you didn't belong somewhere because of your race. Comment number 2 if you think Jasmine was right to record the flight attendant's conversation. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about people fighting back against injustice. What do you think Anthony has planned? Is he just going to comfort his wife, or does he have something bigger in mind? Let's find out. Anthony Thompson was waiting in the lobby when Jasmine arrived at the St. Regis. His tall frame was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, but his usual composed demeanor had been replaced with barely contained fury. When he saw Jasmine, he crossed the marble floor in long strides and embraced her. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," he murmured into her hair. Jasmine relaxed into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. "It's not your fault." "No, but it shouldn't have happened," Anthony replied, guiding her toward the elevator. "And they're going to answer for it." In the presidential suite, Jasmine took in the opulent surroundings with little interest. Under normal circumstances, she might have appreciated the stunning Atlanta skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows or the elegant furnishings, but tonight she was too drained to care. "I need to shower and change," she said, gesturing to her stained clothing. "And then figure out how to deliver a keynote tomorrow without my presentation notes." "Your notes are backed up online, right?" Anthony asked. Jasmine nodded. "Yes, but the paper copies had all my last-minute annotations." "We'll solve that," Anthony assured her. "But first, let me show you what I've learned about your flight crew." He led her to a dining table where his laptop was open, surrounded by several tablets displaying different information. Anthony had built his tech empire on AI ethics and inclusive algorithm design, creating systems that identified and corrected for biases. His company, Tech Fusion, had revolutionized how artificial intelligence was developed and implemented across industries. "While you were in the air, I had my team do some research," Anthony explained, pulling up a document. This wasn't an isolated incident. These particular crew members, Stephanie Watson, Brian Mitchell, and lead attendant Michael Reynolds, have a pattern of discriminatory behavior. He showed her a spreadsheet detailing numerous complaints filed against the trio over the past 3 years. The complaints were remarkably similar: black passengers reporting rude treatment, accidental spills, seating, confusion, and claims of being disruptive when they complained. Most of these complaints were buried, Anthony continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. AmeriSky's internal process ensures they never reach the public or result in meaningful consequences. At most, the employees receive additional training. So they've been getting away with this for years, Jasmine said, anger replacing her earlier fatigue. Yes, but not anymore, Anthony replied with grim determination. There's more. AmeriSky Airlines is currently seeking a major investment for their expansion plans. They need about $2 billion to update their fleet and open new international routes. Jasmine looked up sharply, beginning to understand where this was heading. And let me guess, Tech Fusion Ventures is one of the potential investors they're courting? Anthony's expression shifted to one of cold calculation, the look that had earned him the nickname, the chess player, in business circles for his ability to think several moves ahead. We're not just one of the potential investors, we're the lead in a consortium that controls the entire $2 billion they're seeking, he confirmed. Their CEO, Jonathan Pierce, has been aggressively pursuing a meeting with me for months. That meeting is scheduled for next week. What are you planning, Anthony? Jasmine asked, recognizing the strategic look in his eyes. First, I'm going to call Pierce directly, Anthony said, checking his watch. It's not too late. He'll take my call regardless of the hour. As if on cue, his assistant texted, Mr. Pierce is available whenever you're ready. Anthony initiated the call on speakerphone, his demeanor shifting to the cool, controlled business persona that had made him a formidable force in the tech world. Jonathan, Anthony Thompson here, he began when the call connected. Anthony. What a pleasure, came an eager voice. I was just reviewing the presentation for our meeting next week. I think you'll be very impressed with our expansion plans. I'm calling about a different matter, Jonathan, Anthony cut in. There was an incident on one of your flights today involving racial discrimination by your crew. A pause. I haven't been briefed on any incidents today. Can you provide details? The victim was my wife, Dr. Jasmine Thompson, Anthony stated flatly. A flight attendant deliberately poured orange juice on her, ruining her clothing and presentation materials. When she reported this treatment, she was isolated, dismissed, and ultimately escorted off the plane by security as if she were a criminal. That sounds concerning, Pierce replied, his tone cautious. But I'm sure there must be some misunderstanding. Our crews are thoroughly trained in customer service excellence. There's no misunderstanding, Anthony continued. My wife recorded your crew members making explicitly racist comments about her after the incident. He played the recording, the flight attendants' voices filling the room with their casual bigotry. The silence on the other end of the line when it finished was telling. That's completely unacceptable, Pierce finally said, his voice now deadly serious. I assure you, Anthony, this does not reflect our company values. We'll conduct a full investigation immediately. An investigation isn't enough, Jonathan, Anthony replied coldly. This isn't an isolated incident. These particular crew members have a history of similar behavior that your company has systematically ignored. Another pause. I wasn't aware of any pattern. But I promise you, we take discrimination very seriously at AmeriSky. Actions speak louder than words, Anthony countered. And your company's actions, or lack thereof, tell a different story. I'll be reconsidering our investment discussions in light of this incident. Now, Anthony, Pierce's voice took on a pleading edge, let's not be hasty. This is one unfortunate incident with a few employees who clearly need to be disciplined. It doesn't reflect our corporate culture. Culture starts at the top, Jonathan. When leadership allows discrimination to go unchecked, it becomes part of the culture. I'll see you at our meeting next week. In the meantime, I suggest you take a hard look at how your company handles these unfortunate incidents. Good night. Anthony ended the call, turning to Jasmine. He'll make some token gesture now, probably fire Stephanie and offer us free flights for a year. That doesn't solve the underlying problem, Jasmine pointed out. Exactly, Anthony agreed. Which is why this is just the opening move. He showed her another screen displaying the history of Amerisky Airlines. The company had started as a regional carrier 30 years ago, gradually expanding to become the fifth largest airline in the country. But beneath their glossy marketing about customer service excellence was a troubling record of discrimination complaints and labor disputes. Their corporate culture is the real issue, Anthony explained. From the top down, they've created a system that protects employees who discriminate and punishes customers who report it. Jasmine sank into a chair, processing everything. So what's the next move in your chess game? Several moves simultaneously, Anthony replied. First, I've arranged for Vera Wang to send over a selection of dresses for your keynote tomorrow. They should arrive within the hour. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. You called Vera Wang personally? We funded her latest digital showcase, Anthony explained with a small smile. She owes me a favor. But that's just logistics. The real strategy involves using this incident as leverage for systemic change. He outlined his plan. Rather than simply seeking punishment for the individuals involved, he would use TechFusion's position as a potential investor to demand comprehensive reforms in Amerisky's training, reporting, and accountability systems. Companies only change when it affects their bottom line, Anthony explained. Pierce might not care about doing the right thing, but he definitely cares about that $2 billion investment. As Anthony continued detailing his strategy, Jasmine was reminded of why they had connected so deeply when they first met 15 years ago as struggling students. Despite their different fields, she in medicine, he in technology, they shared a fundamental belief in using their talents to create positive change. They had met at a campus coffee shop where Anthony was working to pay his tuition. Jasmine was a medical student buried in anatomy textbooks, and Anthony was coding between serving customers. They bonded over their parallel journeys, both from modest backgrounds, both determined to excel in fields where people like them were underrepresented. When Anthony launched his first startup from their tiny apartment, Jasmine had supported him through endless nights of coding and pitching to skeptical investors. When she faced discrimination during her residency, Anthony had been her rock, believing in her brilliance when others questioned her capabilities. They had built their success together, step by painful step. I've made some other calls too, Anthony continued, bringing Jasmine back to the present. Remember Thomas Wilson from Amerisky's board? We served on that tech ethics panel together last year. He was appalled when I shared the recording and promised to raise it at the emergency board meeting he's calling. A knock at the door interrupted them. A hotel staff member delivered a garment bag from Vera Wang, along with a laptop containing Jasmine's presentation with all her notes meticulously recreated. How did you, Jasmine began. I had my assistant contact your research team, Anthony explained. Dr. Chen was happy to help reconstruct your notes. Jasmine felt a wave of gratitude washing over her exhaustion. This was why they worked so well together. Anthony understood that her work was just as important as his billion-dollar deals. Thank you, she said simply. Get some rest, Anthony urged. Tomorrow you'll deliver an amazing keynote, and we'll begin the real work of holding Amerisky accountable. As Jasmine finally allowed herself to relax in a hot shower, washing away the physical traces of the day's humiliation, she reflected on how quickly the power dynamic had shifted. On the plane, she had been powerless against the crew's discrimination. Now, with Anthony's resources and strategic mind, they had the leverage to demand real change. But more important than his wealth or connections was his understanding, his refusal to let her face this alone, his recognition that her dignity was non-negotiable. As she prepared for tomorrow's keynote, Jasmine knew that what had happened on that flight wouldn't be swept under the rug like so many incidents before it. This time would be different. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Convention Center hummed with anticipation as hundreds of the world's leading neurosurgeons and researchers found their seats. The annual Neurological Innovation Summit was the field's most prestigious gathering, and this year's keynote address was generating particular buzz. Backstage, Jasmine smoothed the sleek lines of her new emerald green Vera Wang dress, a far cry from the juice-stained outfit from yesterday. Despite her meticulous preparation, anxiety fluttered in her stomach, not about the medical content she would present, but about maintaining her composure while still processing yesterday's humiliation. 5 minutes, Dr. Thompson, a staff member announced, handing her a microphone. Jasmine nodded, reviewing her speaking points one last time. Anthony had offered to attend for moral support, but she had declined. This was her professional world, and she needed to stand on her own within it. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "You're going to be brilliant. Remember who you are and why your work matters." Drawing strength from his words, Jasmine took a deep breath as the conference director approached the podium on stage. "It is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker," the director began. Dr. Jasmine Thompson has revolutionized treatment protocols for previously inoperable brain tumors, reducing mortality rates by 23% over the past 5 years. Her research on racial disparities in neurological treatment outcomes has transformed how we approach patient care. Please welcome Dr. Jasmine Thompson. The applause was enthusiastic as Jasmine walked onto the stage, her posture perfect, her smile professional. Looking out at the sea of faces, predominantly white and male, with a sprinkling of women and people of color, she was acutely aware of her visibility as one of the few black female neurosurgeons in the country. "Thank you for that warm introduction," she began, her voice steady. "Today I'll be sharing our team's latest findings on reducing treatment disparities across demographic groups." As she launched into her presentation, Jasmine found herself subtly revising her planned remarks. The clinical distance she had originally intended gave way to something more personal and powerful. When we examine why black patients are 68% less likely to receive advanced neurological interventions compared to white patients with identical symptoms and insurance coverage, we must look beyond clinical factors, she explained, displaying a series of compelling data visualizations. We must examine the invisible biases that shape medical decision-making. She shared case studies, research methodologies, and groundbreaking findings with precision and clarity. But it was when she departed from her prepared remarks that the audience leaned forward in their seats. "Yesterday, on my flight to this conference, I experienced firsthand how prejudice operates in seemingly professional environments," Jasmine said, her voice taking on a new depth of authority. "I was treated differently from other passengers solely because of my race. My complaints were dismissed. My dignity was disregarded." A hushed silence fell over the ballroom. "I share this not to center my personal experience, but because it illustrates exactly why our research matters. The assumptions people make, about who belongs in first class, about who deserves respect, about whose pain is taken seriously, these same assumptions follow our patients into our examining rooms, our operating theaters, our recovery wards." The tension in the room was palpable as Jasmine connected her personal experience to the broader systemic issues her research addressed. When we pretend these biases don't exist, we cannot address their impact. When institutions dismiss reports of discrimination rather than confronting them, they become complicit in perpetuating harm. She returned to her data, demonstrating how implementing bias awareness protocols had significantly improved treatment outcomes for minority patients at hospitals participating in her research program. "The good news is that when we acknowledge these problems exist, we can solve them," Jasmine concluded. "We are scientists and healers. Evidence and ethics are our guiding principles. We have the tools to create more equitable healthcare systems. What we need now is the collective will to use them." As she finished her presentation, the room erupted in a standing ovation. Colleagues who had previously maintained professional distance approached with newfound respect, many sharing their own experiences with discrimination in medical settings. Dr. Sarah Kim embraced her warmly. "That was the most powerful keynote I've ever heard at this conference. You turned your ordeal into a teaching moment for everyone in this room." As Jasmine navigated the crowd of well-wishers, a woman approached with a press badge. "Dr. Thompson. I'm Alicia Washington from the Atlanta Tribune. Would you have a moment to speak with me? Your keynote has everyone talking." Jasmine agreed to a brief interview in a quiet corner of the convention center. As they spoke about her research, Alicia's questions gradually shifted toward the personal experience Jasmine had mentioned. Would you be willing to share more details about the incident you referenced in your speech? Alicia asked. Jasmine carefully considered her response. What happened to me yesterday was not an isolated incident. It reflects systemic issues that affect countless travelers every day. She described the events on the AmeriSky flight without sensationalizing them, focusing on the pattern they represented rather than the individual actors involved. This isn't about one flight attendant or one airline, Jasmine explained. It's about institutional cultures that allow discrimination to flourish by dismissing complaints and protecting those who engage in biased behavior. Alicia nodded thoughtfully. You're not the first person to report such treatment on AmeriSky. I've been investigating several complaints from passengers of color over the past year. Would you be willing to share the recording you made? Jasmine hesitated. I need to consider the broader implications. My goal isn't public shaming but meaningful change. I understand, Alicia replied. But sometimes transparency is necessary for accountability. By the way, I've spoken with other passengers from your flight who corroborate your account. Before Jasmine could respond, she spotted Diane Williams approaching through the crowd. Dr. Thompson. I hoped I might find you here, Diane said warmly. I wanted to check how you're doing after yesterday's ordeal. Jasmine introduced Diane to Alicia, explaining that she had been a witness to the incident. I came to the conference specifically to find you, Diane admitted. What happened on that flight has been bothering me all night. I've filed a complaint with the airline as a witness, but I want to do more. If you're pursuing this further, I'm willing to go on record with what I saw. Alicia's eyes lit up at this unexpected development. Ms. Williams, would you be willing to speak with me for my article? As the three women exchanged contact information, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. The story is starting to break on social media. #JusticeForJasmine is trending. Call me when you can. Jasmine excused herself to call Anthony in private. Your keynote is getting attention beyond the medical community, Anthony explained when she called. Someone in the audience tweeted about how you connected your research on healthcare disparities to your experience yesterday. It's resonating with people. That wasn't my intention, Jasmine said, concerned about the potential backlash. I know, but it might help our cause, Anthony replied. My team is monitoring the situation. Meanwhile, I've been working with legal and PR specialists to develop our strategy for the meeting with AmeriSky. How do you feel about going public with this? Jasmine considered the question carefully. Throughout her career, she had been careful to avoid being labeled as someone who played the race card or sought attention through controversy. But remaining silent would only enable the cycle to continue. If it helps create real change, I'm willing to speak out, she decided. But this has to be about more than just what happened to me. It needs to address the broader pattern. That's exactly what I was thinking, Anthony agreed. I'll see you back at the hotel tonight. We have more planning to do. As Jasmine returned to the conference, navigating congratulations from colleagues and further questions from journalists who had caught wind of the story, she felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and determination. The incident that had been meant to diminish her had instead become a platform for addressing issues far larger than one ruined dress or one humiliating flight. By the time she left the convention center that evening, #JusticeForJasmine was the top trending topic in Atlanta, and AmeriSky's social media accounts were flooded with questions about their handling of discrimination complaints. The small spark of resistance she had shown on that flight was igniting a much larger conversation, one that neither she nor AmeriSky could control. The AmeriSky corporate headquarters in Dallas projected wealth and stability with its gleaming glass tower and imposing lobby. Anthony Thompson adjusted his custom Tom Ford suit as he stepped out of his private car, projecting the confidence of a man accustomed to billion-dollar negotiations. Mr. Thompson, welcome to AmeriSky, greeted a nervous executive assistant. The board is assembled in the main conference room and eager to meet with you. Anthony nodded politely. I'm looking forward to our discussion. As he was escorted through the building, Anthony maintained his reputation for unreadable composure. Inside, however, his mind was calculating each move in the high-stakes game he was about to play. The past 3 days had transformed what began as a personal affront into a strategic opportunity for systemic change. The conference room doors opened to reveal a long table surrounded by Amerisky's leadership team. CEO Jonathan Pierce rose immediately, extending his hand with practiced corporate warmth. "Anthony. Wonderful to finally meet in person," Pierce said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We've prepared a comprehensive presentation on our expansion plans." The other executives and board members murmured greetings, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The hashtag Justice for Jasmine hashtag had gained national attention, and Amerisky's stock had dropped 3% since the story broke. Anthony shook hands firmly. "Before we discuss any investment possibilities, I'd like to address the elephant in the room." Pierce's smile tightened. "Yes, about that unfortunate incident, we've taken immediate action. The flight attendant in question has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." "Just the one flight attendant?" Anthony asked, his voice deceptively mild as he took his seat at the table. "For now, yes," Pierce replied cautiously. "We're still gathering all the facts." Anthony nodded thoughtfully, opening his leather portfolio. "Let's start with the facts, then. My team has compiled a report I think you'll find illuminating." He distributed copies to everyone at the table. "This document contains 67 discrimination complaints filed against Amerisky in the past 18 months. 23 involved the same crew members who were on my wife's flight. All were dismissed or resolved with token gestures like travel vouchers." The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances as they flipped through the damning evidence. "Where did you get this information?" demanded Harold Robertson, the company's chief legal officer. "Some came from public records, some from former employees, some from passengers who reached out after my wife's story went public," Anthony explained calmly. "The pattern is clear and concerning." Pierce cleared his throat. "While I appreciate your thoroughness, Anthony, I'm not sure what this has to do with our potential business relationship. We're here to discuss a $2 billion investment in Amerisky's future." "Everything," Anthony replied simply. "At Tech Fusion, we've built our success on ethical AI systems that identify and correct for bias. We don't partner with companies that demonstrate systemic discrimination without concrete plans to address it." He let the implication hang in the air. The investment they desperately needed was now explicitly tied to how they handled this issue. "We take these allegations very seriously," Pierce insisted, his corporate mask slipping to reveal genuine alarm. "We're prepared to terminate Stephanie Watson immediately as a show of good faith." Anthony leaned back in his chair. "That's exactly the problem, Jonathan. You see this as a PR issue to be managed rather than a systemic problem to be solved. Firing one employee, making her the scapegoat, changes nothing about the culture that enabled her behavior." He stood up and walked to the front of the room, taking control of the meeting as naturally as he commanded his own boardroom. "Let me be clear, I'm still interested in investing in Amerisky, but only under conditions that address the real issues." Anthony activated the presentation screen, displaying a comprehensive proposal for organizational reform. "These are my terms." The executives leaned forward as Anthony outlined a detailed plan: mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, a transparent complaint review process overseen by an independent ethics committee, diversity targets for hiring and promotion, and regular climate surveys to assess employee attitudes and passenger experiences. "This would cost millions to implement," protested the CFO, Stanley Peters. "And the oversight committee would limit our operational flexibility." "The current approach is already costing you," Anthony countered. "Customer loyalty, employee morale, legal exposure, and now your stock price. My team estimates these reforms would actually increase your profitability by 8% within 2 years by reducing turnover, litigation, and improving customer retention." Thomas Wilson, the board member Anthony had contacted earlier, spoke up for the first time. I've reviewed Mr. Thompson's proposal in detail, and I find it both reasonable and necessary. The data on discrimination complaints is disturbing and represents a significant liability. A heated discussion broke out among the board members. Some argued for accepting Anthony's terms immediately to secure the investment, others pushed back against what they viewed as external interference in company operations. Pierce attempted to regain control of the meeting. "Anthony, we appreciate your concerns and suggestions. We'll need time to review this proposal thoroughly. In the meantime, perhaps we could move forward with our original agenda regarding the expansion plans." Anthony closed his portfolio deliberately. "There is no original agenda anymore, Jonathan. My consortium's investment is contingent on meaningful reform. Full stop. You're letting a personal incident dictate business decisions," Pierce argued, frustration evident in his voice. "No," Anthony corrected him. "I'm letting your company's response to discrimination inform my assessment of your corporate culture and long-term viability. That's just good business." He stood to leave. "You have 48 hours to consider my proposal. After that, my consortium will pursue other investment opportunities." The tension in the room was palpable as Anthony walked toward the door. Just before exiting, he turned back to address the stunned executives. "One more thing," he added. "My wife's experience wasn't an isolated incident, it was the last straw. Your crew's behavior and your company's inadequate response revealed a pattern that my investment team cannot ignore. I look forward to your decision." As the door closed behind him, Anthony heard the eruption of voices in the conference room. His driver was waiting outside, ready to take him to the airport where his private jet was prepared for immediate departure to Atlanta. During the ride, Anthony received a call from Thomas Wilson. "That was quite a performance," Wilson said. "The board is in chaos. Pierce is trying to convince everyone that you're bluffing, but nobody's buying it." "I never bluff," Anthony replied. "What's your assessment?" "They'll accept your terms," Wilson predicted. "The investment is too important to lose." But Pierce is furious, he feels cornered. "Good," Anthony said. "When people are cornered, their true priorities emerge. Keep me posted on the internal discussions." After ending the call, Anthony texted Jasmine, "Meeting complete. Applying maximum pressure. How are things on your end?" Her response came quickly, former AmeriSky employees reaching out with more evidence. "Something bigger is brewing. Call when you land." As his car approached the airport, Anthony reflected on the high-stakes game he was playing. This was about more than justice for Jasmine or punishment for one crew's behavior. It was about using their position of influence to create lasting change in an industry where discrimination had been normalized and excused for too long. The irony wasn't lost on him. 15 years ago, he was a scholarship student who couldn't afford a plane ticket home for the holidays. Now he had the power to reshape an entire airline's approach to equality and inclusion. The responsibility weighed heavily, but so did the opportunity to transform a personal injustice into institutional progress. As his private jet took off for Atlanta, Anthony knew that Pierce and the AmeriSky board were just beginning to understand the full implications of having chosen the wrong passenger to discriminate against. Jasmine placed her phone on the hotel suite's coffee table, having just ended a call that lasted over an hour. The conversation had left her both stunned and energized by possibilities she hadn't considered. That was Tanya Lewis, she told Anthony, who was reviewing documents on his tablet. "She's a representative from the Flight Attendants Union. Apparently, our story has become a catalyst for something they've been working toward for years." Anthony set down his tablet, intrigued. "What did she want?" "To meet with us," Jasmine replied. "She says there's a significant group of AmeriSky employees, flight attendants, ground crew, even some pilots, who have been trying to address discrimination within the company for years, but they've faced resistance and retaliation from management. That aligns with what we've uncovered," Anthony noted. "The problem isn't just a few biased employees, it's a corporate culture that enables and protects them while silencing those who speak up. Jasmine nodded. Tanya wants to form an alliance. The employees have valuable insider information and legitimate grievances, but they lack the platform and protection to make their voices heard. We have both. Anthony considered this development thoughtfully. This could significantly strengthen our position. When do they want to meet? Tonight, if possible, Jasmine said. Several of them are flying in specifically for this discussion. Let's use the conference room downstairs, Anthony decided. More space, and more privacy than meeting here in the suite. As evening approached, Jasmine found herself pacing nervously. The story had grown far beyond what she had anticipated. That morning, the Atlanta Tribune had published Alicia Washington's article, featuring not only Jasmine's account but testimonials from Diane Williams and 2 other passengers from the flight. The piece also included statements from former AmeriSky employees describing a pattern of discriminatory practices and management cover-ups. AmeriSky had responded with a carefully worded statement expressing deep concern about the allegations and promising a thorough investigation, but the damage to their reputation was already significant. Their stock had dropped another 2%, and the hashtag #BoycottAmeriSky was gaining traction on social media. Are we doing the right thing? Jasmine asked Anthony suddenly. This has become so much bigger than what happened to me. Anthony took her hands in his. That's precisely why it's important. Your experience was a symptom of a much larger problem. If we focus only on getting justice for you, nothing really changes for all the other passengers who don't have our resources or platform. Jasmine squeezed his hands gratefully. When did you become so wise? I learned from the best, he replied with a smile. A brilliant doctor once taught me that treating symptoms without addressing root causes is never effective in the long run. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from the hotel staff, informing them that their guests had arrived. They headed downstairs to the private conference room where 6 people were waiting, a diverse group ranging in age from mid-20s to late 50s, all with the slightly weary look of airline employees accustomed to long hours and challenging conditions. Tanya Lewis, a black woman in her 40s with a commanding presence, stepped forward to make introductions. Dr. and Mr. Thompson, thank you for meeting with us. This is James Carter, a pilot with 20 years at AmeriSky. Sophia Rodriguez and David Kim, flight attendants, Nathan Parker from ground operations, and Lisa Johnson from customer service. After exchanging greetings, they settled around the conference table. We've been following your story closely, Tanya began. What happened to you, Dr. Thompson, is unfortunately all too familiar to many of us, both as witnesses and sometimes as unwilling participants in a system that penalizes those who speak up. Sophia Rodriguez nodded emphatically. I've reported discriminatory behavior by colleagues multiple times, only to find myself scheduled for less desirable routes or labeled as not a team player in my performance reviews. The problem goes all the way to the top, added James Carter. CEO Pierce sets the tone with his dismissal of diversity initiatives as PC nonsense in private meetings. It creates an environment where some crew members feel empowered to act on their biases. For the next 2 hours, Jasmine and Anthony listened as the employees shared their experiences and insights into AmeriSky's corporate culture. They described an environment where complaints about discrimination were routinely buried, where certain crews were known for their problematic behavior but protected by management, and where employees who advocated for change faced subtle but effective retaliation. What exactly are you hoping to achieve through this alliance? Anthony asked once everyone had spoken. Tanya leaned forward. Real, structural change, not just cosmetic fixes. We need transparent complaint procedures, accountability for discrimination at all levels, and protection for whistleblowers. We need diversity in leadership positions and comprehensive training that goes beyond checking boxes. That aligns perfectly with the reforms I've proposed to the board, Anthony noted, sharing the details of his meeting and the conditions he had placed on the potential investment. Nathan Parker, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. The investment leverage is powerful, but Pierce is stubborn. He'll try to appear compliant while changing as little as possible. Which is why we need insider oversight, Tanya added. People within the company who can verify whether changes are genuine or just for show. We've been contacted by AmeriSky's PR team, Jasmine revealed. They're offering a substantial settlement and a public apology, with a non-disclosure agreement attached, of course. Classic Pierce strategy, Lisa Johnson said with a knowing look. Make the immediate problem go away with money while ensuring nothing fundamentally changes. I assume you declined? Tanya asked. Jasmine nodded. Some things are more important than money. We need to coordinate our approach, Anthony suggested. Your inside knowledge combined with our external pressure could create the perfect conditions for meaningful reform. They spent the next hour developing a coordinated strategy. The employees would document ongoing issues and share them through secure channels. Anthony would use his investor leverage and business connections to maintain pressure on the board, and Jasmine would continue to speak publicly about the broader implications of discrimination in customer service industries. As the meeting concluded, Tanya presented an unexpected piece of information. There's something else you should know. Stephanie Watson, Brian Mitchell, and Michael Reynolds have all reached out to Dr. Thompson through various channels, attempting to apologize. Jasmine looked surprised. I haven't received any messages from them. They've been contacting your office and the conference organizers, Tanya explained. We have colleagues who've intercepted the messages. Their sudden remorse seems directly proportional to the public relations disaster and their fear of termination. Anthony's expression hardened. Convenient timing for their conscience to kick in. Exactly, Tanya agreed. This isn't about genuine understanding of what they did wrong, it's about saving their jobs now that there are consequences. Jasmine considered this information thoughtfully. Their apologies or lack thereof isn't really the point anymore. This has become about something much larger than individual behavior. As they wrapped up the meeting, exchanging contact information and solidifying their unusual alliance, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had begun as a humiliating personal experience was transforming into a catalyst for change that could benefit countless travelers and employees. Back in their suite, Anthony received an urgent call from Thomas Wilson. Pierce is making his move, Wilson reported. He's trying to sway the board toward a compromise that would appear to meet your demands while maintaining the status quo beneath the surface. He's arguing that your proposal is an overreaction to an isolated incident. How's that strategy working for him? Anthony asked. Not well, Wilson replied. Your detailed report on past complaints was too thorough to dismiss. And now with the employees speaking out and the media coverage expanding, the pressure is building. Several major corporate clients have contacted us expressing concerns about their continuing business relationship. Good, Anthony said. Keep me posted on any developments. I expect Pierce will try to contact me directly soon to negotiate. After ending the call, he turned to Jasmine. Pierce is scrambling, but he's still trying to minimize the changes required. We need to increase the pressure. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. What if we took a more direct approach? You've been acquiring shares in AmeriSky over the past few days, right? Yes, Anthony confirmed. We've accumulated about 4% so far, purchasing through various investment vehicles to stay under the radar. What would it take to secure a board seat? Jasmine asked, a strategic gleam in her eye. Anthony smiled slowly as he caught her thinking. With our current holdings and Thomas Wilson's support, we'd need approximately 11% more. It's aggressive but possible. Then let's do it, Jasmine decided. Sometimes the only way to change a system is from within. As they began planning this bold new move, Jasmine's phone lit up with a notification. The hashtag Justice for Jasmine hashtag had evolved into hashtag TransformAmeriSky, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences with discrimination while traveling. What had begun as an accidental orange juice spill was now fueling a movement for accountability that extended far beyond one airline or one incident. The flight attendants who had dismissed and humiliated her likely never imagined that their actions would lead to this, a reckoning that threatened to transform not just their employment status but the entire corporate culture that had enabled their behavior. 1 month later, Jasmine and Anthony Thompson arrived at AmeriSky's headquarters for an emergency board meeting. The atmosphere was markedly different from Anthony's previous visit. There was tension in the air, but also an undercurrent of inevitable change. In the 4 weeks since the incident, their strategic campaign had transformed the landscape. Through careful acquisitions, Anthony's investment group now controlled 15% of AmeriSky's stock, enough to secure a board seat and significant influence over corporate decisions. The #TransformAmeriSky movement had grown into a national conversation about discrimination in the travel industry, with major news outlets covering the story and congressional leaders calling for industry-wide accountability measures. CEO Jonathan Pierce greeted them with tight professional courtesy, the strained smile of a man who knew he was fighting a losing battle. "Anthony, Dr. Thompson, welcome. The board is assembled and ready to begin." The boardroom was filled with serious faces, existing board members, corporate officers, and legal counsel. Thomas Wilson nodded subtly to Anthony as they entered, a silent confirmation that their carefully orchestrated plan was proceeding as expected. As the meeting was called to order, Pierce attempted to project confidence. "Before we address the main agenda items, I'd like to update everyone on our response to recent events. We've implemented a new customer complaint system, scheduled sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff, and terminated the employment of the crew members involved in last month's incident." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "All crew members, or just Stephanie Watson?" Pierce hesitated. "Stephanie Watson has been terminated. Brian Mitchell and Michael Reynolds have received formal reprimands and mandatory retraining." "Interesting," Anthony replied coolly. "Especially since our evidence indicates that Michael Reynolds has been involved in dismissing at least 12 prior discrimination complaints, creating a pattern of institutional protection for biased behavior." He opened his portfolio and distributed a new set of documents to each board member. This report details not just the history of complaints, but the systematic process by which they were minimized, dismissed, or buried. This isn't about a few problematic employees, it's about a corporate culture that enables discrimination while punishing those who report it. The board members flipped through the damning evidence with growing discomfort. The report included internal emails, testimonials from former employees, and statistical analyses demonstrating clear patterns of disparate treatment toward passengers of color. Thomas Wilson cleared his throat. "As a board member committed to this company's long-term success, I find this information deeply troubling. It suggests not just ethical failures but significant legal and financial liability." Pierce attempted to regain control of the narrative. "These allegations are being investigated, and we're committed to addressing any legitimate concerns. However, I believe some of this information has been presented without proper context." "The context is clear," Jasmine interjected, speaking for the first time. "I experienced it firsthand, as have countless others who've come forward. The question now is not whether there's a problem, but whether this company has the courage to solve it genuinely rather than cosmetically." Anthony nodded in agreement. "Which brings us to the first item on today's agenda, leadership accountability." He looked directly at Pierce. "A corporate culture reflects its leadership. The evidence we've presented demonstrates a pattern of dismissing discrimination that comes from the top down. Therefore, I move that the board consider a change in executive leadership, beginning with the CEO position." The room erupted in a mixture of protests and murmured agreement. Pierce's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You're using your investment position to pursue a personal vendetta." "This isn't personal," Anthony replied calmly. "It's governance. The board's primary responsibility is to ensure the company's long-term success. Under your leadership, AmeriSky has developed systemic problems that threaten its reputation, customer base, and financial stability. The stock has dropped 12% in the past month alone." Thomas Wilson nodded gravely. "I second the motion to vote on new leadership." The evidence suggests a change is necessary for the company's survival and growth. What followed was 3 hours of intense discussion, procedural maneuvers, and finally, a vote. By a narrow margin of 7-5, the board voted to remove Jonathan Pierce as CEO, effective immediately. The CFO would serve as interim CEO while a search committee identified a permanent replacement. As Pierce left the boardroom, visibly shaken by this unexpected defeat, Anthony moved to the second phase of their plan. Now that we've addressed leadership, we need to implement comprehensive reforms throughout the organization, he stated, presenting the detailed proposal that he and Jasmine had developed in collaboration with Tanya Lewis and the employee group. The plan was far-reaching: an independent ethics committee with real enforcement power, transparent complaint procedures, anti-bias training developed by experts in the field, diversity targets for management positions, and protection for employees who reported discrimination. These reforms will require significant investment, the interim CEO noted with concern. Yes, Anthony acknowledged. But the cost of not implementing them will be far greater. My investment consortium is prepared to provide the full $2 billion originally discussed, contingent on these changes being fully implemented and maintained. After another hour of discussion, the board voted to approve the reform package in its entirety. The financial incentive of Anthony's investment, combined with the mounting public pressure and legal exposure, made it impossible to justify half measures or token gestures. As the meeting concluded, Anthony introduced one final proposal. My wife, Dr. Jasmine Thompson, has agreed to lead a task force on customer experience transformation. Her expertise in addressing systemic bias in complex organizations will be invaluable to AmeriSky's reform efforts. The board readily approved this appointment, eager to demonstrate their commitment to change now that Pierce's obstructionist leadership had been removed. There's one more thing, Jasmine added. Tanya Lewis from your flight attendants union has shown exceptional leadership in advocating for ethical practices. I recommend her appointment to a senior diversity and inclusion position within the company. Thomas Wilson smiled. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Those who've been part of identifying the problem should be part of implementing the solution. As they left the boardroom, Anthony and Jasmine were met by Tanya and several members of their unexpected alliance, who had been waiting anxiously for news of the meeting's outcome. It's done, Anthony told them. Pierce is out, the entire crew from Jasmine's flight has been terminated, and the board has approved the full reform package. Cheers and tears of relief greeted this announcement. For many of the employees, this represented the culmination of years of struggle against a system that had seemed immovable. There's more, Jasmine added with a smile. Tanya, the board has approved your appointment to lead diversity and inclusion initiatives company-wide. You'll have the authority and resources to make real change. Tanya's expression of shock gave way to determined resolve. I won't let you down. We won't let any of our passengers or colleagues down again. 6 months later, Jasmine found herself boarding an AmeriSky flight to Chicago, where she was scheduled to speak at a medical conference. The changes at the airline were immediately apparent. The diverse crew greeted passengers with genuine warmth, regardless of their appearance or seating assignment. Visible complaint procedures were posted, along with the airline's newly adopted anti-discrimination policies. As Jasmine settled into her first-class seat, a flight attendant approached with a tray of beverages. Would you care for some orange juice, Dr. Thompson? She asked with professional courtesy. Jasmine smiled. Yes, thank you. The attendant carefully placed the glass on her tray with a napkin, making eye contact with a genuine smile before moving on to the next passenger with identical consideration. Anthony joined her a moment later, having stopped to speak with the captain, a black woman recently promoted under the airline's new merit-based advancement system. How does it feel? He asked quietly, taking the seat beside her. Jasmine considered the question, looking around at the transformed environment. It feels like progress. Not perfect, but meaningful. Their experience had catalyzed changes beyond AmeriSky. Several other airlines had proactively implemented similar reforms, recognizing that the public was no longer willing to accept discrimination as an unavoidable aspect of travel. Congressional hearings on bias in the transportation industry had led to new regulatory guidelines. The ripple effects continued to spread. "What's next for us?" Anthony asked, taking her hand as the plane prepared for takeoff. Jasmine smiled. "I've been thinking about the hospitality industry. The same patterns exist in hotels, restaurants." Anthony laughed. "Always looking for the next challenge." "Someone has to," she replied. "Change doesn't happen on its own." As the plane climbed into the sky, Jasmine reflected on how a moment of humiliation had transformed into a movement for accountability. The flight attendant who poured juice on her could never have imagined that her small act of bigotry would lead to the CEO's removal and a complete corporate restructuring. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes justice arrived in unexpected ways, and that speaking truth to power could create ripples that eventually became waves. In the months since that fateful flight, Jasmine had established a mentorship program for young black medical students, sharing not just her professional knowledge but the hard-won wisdom about navigating spaces where they might be made to feel they didn't belong. "Your voice matters," she always told them. "No matter who tries to silence it." The orange juice on her tray table now represented not humiliation, but transformation, proof that with the right resources, determination, and allies, even the most entrenched systems could be changed. This story teaches us that fighting discrimination requires more than individual resilience, it demands strategic action and systemic change. When Jasmine faced racism, she didn't just endure it silently or seek personal compensation. She and Anthony recognized that the problem wasn't just a few biased employees but an entire corporate culture that enabled discrimination. True justice often requires addressing root causes, not just symptoms. By leveraging their resources, building alliances, and focusing on institutional reform rather than mere punishment, Jasmine and Anthony created lasting change that benefited countless others. They demonstrated that privilege and power can be tools for positive transformation when used purposefully. The story also highlights the importance of evidence, strategic thinking, and persistence. Jasmine's recording provided undeniable proof, while Anthony's business acumen created financial incentives for reform. Their approach combined moral clarity with practical leverage. Perhaps most importantly, they refused to accept token gestures or symbolic victories. They insisted on comprehensive solutions that addressed the underlying issues, recognizing that real change is measured not by apologies or settlements, but by transformed systems and cultures. Has discrimination ever made you feel powerless? What would you have done in Jasmine's situation? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more powerful accounts of people standing up against injustice and creating meaningful change. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to speak up or who has the influence to make a difference in their community or workplace. Remember, sometimes the most important battles aren't fought for ourselves alone, but for everyone who might face the same injustice tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and may you find the courage to challenge discrimination wherever you encounter it, whether through small acts of solidarity or strategic efforts to change broken systems.